What's going on, guys? Master Coach, Education Director, Aaron Guyette here on the Living Fit Show. And I have the incredible honor and pleasure to have my really good friend, Rick Alexander, on with us today. And I think that you're going to be really excited about some of the topics that we're going to talk about, some of the principles that we're going to talk about, especially in regards to if you're trying to improve any area of your life, be that fitness or into the psychosphere that is the complexity of the human mind. So, Rick, what got you into the personal growth and development area or arena?
Yeah, I think that there's probably a multi-prong approach to what led me here. But, honestly, it is the fitness space. And I've heard of this for many people, but I did take the path of fitness to getting here. Specifically, I fell in love with like the extreme ultra endurance stuff, done a couple 200-mile runs. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But one of the things that I realized in all of that was that I wasn't ever going to be a pro runner. I wasn't ever going to be the best ultra runner in the world, but I was learning things out there in the mountains. Like there were things that I was doing out there that I realized could be applied to the rest of my life. And I realized how I could, by focusing on the psychological aspect of what I was doing, I really could mine those activities. And there's so much gold there for what you could apply to the rest of your life. And that got me thinking about the many different arenas that we find ourselves in, not just the ultra endurance space or the space of adversity, but like, what about on Monday morning when I wake up? How does what I did on Saturday night out in the woods apply to that? And so that was the catalyst for me to kind of just pull threads. And part of what I talk about in my message is the idea that if something resonates with you, just step in that direction. Like you don't have to know why you're stepping in that direction. You don't even have to know where it's going, but stepping in that direction and pulling on the threads that are interesting to you will inevitably open up more doors, more paths, and you'll find yourself somewhere completely new, unexpected. 10 years down the road, look back and realize, wow, it really all unfolded organically. And that's been the case for my path.
Yeah, that's incredible. The funny thing for me is like, what made you pull on the thread of a 200-mile run? Or I know you did what is it, 250 miles with armor
240
on?
with body armor on.
What even made you think that, one, you could physically endure that, but then two, the mental aspect of it? Yeah, what brought that in there?
Yeah, I think I can tell this story in about 2 seconds, but I read the book Ultra Marathon Man when I was growing up, by Dean Karnazes. And he just opened up this world of, I don't know, there was something about it that drew me. It was like, man, so people, what I found in my life is that people are always handing you expectations, and they're also handing you your limits. Like, this is what you're capable of. And if you try to defy that, if you're like, man, because this happened to me when I looked at going into the military in a special operations capacity, it was like everybody was like ready to hand me my limits. Like, people don't really make it. And my thought is like, well, but somebody does, right? Somebody must make it. And so the chances aren't zero. And when I read that book, it opened my mind to like, wow, people are capable of doing far more than I thought. So I ran a 50 miler. I didn't really train for it, I'll be honest. I just gritted my way through it. And there was something about it that I fell in love with. And I made a note. I was like, okay, I'm going to do 100 one day. But I didn't run again after that for a very long time. And it was probably 4 years later, I was like, okay, I'm ready. I signed up for 100, but because I had run a 50 miler and got away, and I'd done a marathon and I got away with it without training, I tried to do the same thing. And I fractured both of my feet, got stress fractures in my feet. I was like vomiting, diarrhea. Like, it was amidst the most difficult, painful thing I've ever been. I just remember being in this canyon in the San Ynez Mountains in Santa Barbara. I'm in mile like 58, I believe. And the race started at night. So I'd run through a full night already. And it's like 120 degrees, sweltering in this canyon. I'm vomiting uncontrollably because I started cramping up so early. So I started eating salt to keep the cramps from going away. And then eventually all of that salt caught up to me. And I couldn't even take a step without just both ends. It was terrible. It was like perhaps the lowest of the low for me. And, anyway, I didn't make it through that race. I didn't quit, but from that point of that low, I still went another 23 miles, but then I didn't make the check off. Like you have to make 8 stations in a certain amount of time. And they're like, you're done, kid. You're barely moving. And I like fractured feet, So I go home and I'm laid up in my apartment in San Diego, feet are elevated. I'm like just so low. And in that moment, I was like, yeah, this isn't where my story ends. And I went online and I found a 200 miler and I signed up for it there as I was like sitting in my misery. And the race wasn't for another, I think it was like 13 months later. So I trained hard and then did my first 200 miler and ended up running a bunch of ultras on the way to that. But yeah, I don't know what it was exactly other than just being really intrigued by the question of my own capability. Like, what is the end? What is the limit of my own capacity? And the interesting thing about these races is that you find that you have no idea what your capacity is because you actually can keep going far beyond what you think when you think that you're done. Yeah. And we could get into like how that became personal development. But yeah, that was definitely the beginning story.
Just out of curiosity, have you heard of any Yuri Robic stuff? Jurerobic, the cyclist?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, then we don't have to go there. He did the race across America in like this really incredible time, but he's talking about like the same thing that you're saying, but he was like, he was running from like Chechnyan rebels at one point. Like he was having like these like crazy visual hallucinations during it. Just a pretty incredible story, but just as incredible as yours. That's why I was wondering if maybe you had heard that. Unfortunately, he died in a car accident in his home country, just cycling down the mountain, which is really sad.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah. Anyway, sorry.
I've had some pretty intense hallucinations out there.
Oh, okay.
I remember I was in Tahoe doing this 200 miler and one of my buddies was pacing me and we like came down this valley and I think I'm 140 something miles in at this point, and I'd been battling high altitude pulmonary edema. So like I couldn't sleep because essentially my lungs had filled up with fluid because of the altitude. So whenever I laid down to sleep, it felt like I was drowning. So I couldn't sleep. And so I'm like day 3, and I'm like falling apart. So we come into this valley and I'm looking around and I'm like, Brandon, are you seeing this? This is an incredible campsite. And he's like, what? I'm like, look at all these families. I'm like, dude, we have to come back here like after the race and like camp here. And he was like, no, dude, we're like in the middle of a swamp. And like, as I got close to what I thought were people like grilling out with their family, they were like stumps and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, I really need to figure out how to sleep.
Exactly. So I know that you just kind of mentioned this, you were in the special operations community on the Navy side. And so obviously you probably dabbled in some of this, embracing the suck or misery, or also just understanding limits and things like that. And so you're saying that some of that came out of reading that book, right? Ultra Marathon Man. And okay, what are my limits? And is this like a testing ground, a proving ground for you when you went into the Navy, or was it more like you want to, serve your country, or what was in the mindset there?
Yeah, it was a combination of a lot of things. When I was a sophomore, I watched, I don't know if you remember this, but I watched a bunch of Blackwater contractors get their burning bodies hung from that bridge. Yeah. And in that moment, there was something in me shifted, and there was no way that I was not going in the military. Yeah. I didn't know what it would look like or when. And I read Ultra Marathon Man. I started running really long distances. I went on like a 20-mile run, or it's like 23 miles or something when I was like 18, 19 years old. Anyway, I signed up for the Navy on my lunch break. I was a personal trainer in a gym, and I was just like, okay, it's time. I'm doing this thing. And I like went and and did it. Yeah. So it was a combination of, there was definitely a huge pull to nationalism, patriotism, values. I come from a family that really prided that. And then at the same time, I had this deep curiosity to see the world and know what it was about and know my own capabilities. And so for 12 years, it gave me all of that.
Yeah. And so then you got to go visit the worst parts of the world. And no, I'm just kidding. Were there some great places and some crappy places, or you said you got lucky? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I went to 57 countries in my career. So, I had one 9-month deployment to the Middle East, a 9-month deployment to Africa. Both of those were not in the most beautiful place on earth, but I also did 9 months in South America. I lived in Copacabana surfing in Brazil every day. I was teaching prisoner handling. And yeah, I went to Belize and I taught small, boat driving and stuff. I taught a medic course in different countries. So yeah, I got lucky in that because I was a special operations combat medic. And so that school, SOCM, is where all of the different flavors of special forces send their medics. So it's SEAL, SWCC, Army, Marine Recon, right? All of those used to be Air Force till they went and made their own school. Yeah. But essentially, because I went to that, I also got to go farm myself out all the time. On deployment, if we weren't doing anything, I'd go into the JOC and be like, listen, I'm a medic and also I'm Army trained medic. And so people would I'd get to go with, Green Berets on their ops and stuff like that.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And was there an op tempo in South America, or was it mainly training the locals, or?
Yeah, we were training the locals. Very interesting because we would be training them during the day and then they would be going out and running ops at night. Oh, wow. And so it was they were taking what we were doing and going to do it. And I remember I don't know the day, let's just say it was a Thursday. You come in the morning and I didn't realize that that's exactly what they were doing at first. And we go in the morning and somebody's missing and he literally died when they were opping that previous night. And I'm like, right. So we'll take today off. And they're like, no, this is it. And so it's very interesting to be in that side of the world and realize wow, it was interesting because it gave me a bit of job satisfaction that I didn't see coming because we're not just throwing money away. I'm actually training them that they're actually using the skills, and, right there. And I'm like, okay, so we're going to move the medical block up to right now, So yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. So then, you do all these ultra marathons and, so are you still wanting to pursue these 1,000-mile journeys, Suckfest or whatever, or where's your headspace at now?
Are we talking current day or
current day? Military? Yeah, now. So out of the military, and then you've done a bunch of ultra marathons, 200 milers and things like that. And now come current day, are you still pursuing or testing your mettle, so to speak, in those physical capacities, or where's your headspace at now?
Yeah, it's been a minute. I realized personally that I was using those to not face a lot of things about myself. And so it was an escapism for me, no doubt about it. And once I got really serious about just developing myself as an individual and what I'm doing here on earth, it seemed to be that those took a back seat. And what's really cool about that is that now I'm rediscovering the endurance world in a much healthier way. And I'm even thinking, man, imagine going back and doing one of these 200s and being in a good place, that I don't have to be there, but I'm choosing to embrace all of that. Yeah. Not that I thought I had to be there then, but you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think now I did just sign up for another ultra in July and now I'm doing it again.
Cool. Can you tell us which ultra you signed up for?
Well, I guess by the time this airs, we will see. But
it would have already been passed, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Colorado. It's a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. 12 hour. So cool. Essentially as many laps as you can do in 12 hours. Nice. Over the course of a night. Yeah.
Nice. Very cool. And so then now this has brought you through. It seems like a ton of psychological changes or transitions and transformations, even if you will, or formations, with how you understand who you are and who that person is in their interaction with other humans in the world and the universe at large. So then what is sort of your focus now? Because obviously your job back then was trainer, and then it was military. And I know you've written two really incredible books, and both very different, but also the through line is the same. It's like trying to discover who we are. You've had the Clarity Academy, which is like, course to really help people clarify who they are and really understand who they are in relation to what they want to achieve and do and be. So now where does that put you, and what is the sort of the offering or the purpose of your existence?
Yeah. What is the purpose of your existence? No pressure.
No,
yeah. I'm really interested in synthesizing a lot of what I've learned in the trenches of adversity, to be honest with you, because, I watched the world turn upside down over the last year and a half. And as it did, I became really grateful for all of the work I had done prior to that. Like, I couldn't imagine if I had my self-destructive coping mechanisms that I had prior to this going into this pandemic season. Like, I think it would have been a really brutal place. And so I have a heavy heart for people that haven't faced those demons and done that work, because the environment turned it into a boilerplate, right? And so actually now a lot of what I'm thinking about and thinking about the future is great. So I've spent so much time in the trenches of adversity. Some of it, right? Some of it's just life. Life is inherently traumatizing at points. And at the same time, though, I've made it a habit of mine to go face these experiences and again, sift through them for what I could learn and how I could apply that to other parts of my life. And so teaching people the principles of how to be when you're in adversity is starting to become a main topic of mine.
So what are kind of some of the, Cliff Notes version pointers? Like, if somebody's listening, they're like, okay, I'm experiencing this adversity. You must have a heavy heart for me. What can I do if I'm just listening to the 3-minute version of Rick Alexander's, waypoints, if you will?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The questions you ask yourself really matter right now. Like, when you are in adversity, the questions you ask yourself are the most important thing, in my opinion. Actually, I'll start by saying that the questions you ask yourself are really important, right? A lot of people go down the why me route, and that is counterproductive. I mean, it's just unhelpful, because we cannot deny reality, right? We live in this world of shoulds. Oh, it should be this way. He should have been better. She should have done this differently. And it's like, but that's not what happened, right? Reality presented you with something. Your job is to take what it presented you and to act accordingly. And so I think asking questions that allow you to figure out what's real for you are really important. I also think vulnerability really matters when we start talking about adversity, because, we tend to deal with adversity in self-destructive ways, or if you do, then that exists in the dark, right? And so when it exists in the dark, it's got power over you. The only way that you can get rid of that thing, or to take that power back, is to drag those things into the light where they can be extinguished and worked with. This is the psychological principle behind confessing your sins, or something along those lines, right? Actually bringing these things into the light really, really matters. And so those two things, I would say, and let me put out there also that not everybody is ready for your darkness, right? Your partner might not be. Most people can't even be with their own experiences, let alone yours. And that's why this work matters so much to me. Like, we have to do this work for ourselves so that we can offer a safe place for other people. Because by you doing this work on yourself, you can become the catalyst for your entire family, right? For your social network, for your systems. So the questions you ask yourself, right? Being vulnerable and allowing what's real for you to come forward really matters. And I would also say the quality in which, the quality of your consumption really matters. Like, what do you allow in your consciousness, right? The binge watching of Netflix, the scrolling on Instagram, I get that it's dopaminergic pathway, right? You're motivated to do it. I get it, but it's not helping. And so, having some, and same thing with the media, right? You're getting this inject of fear constantly. And it's very hard. We could go down a whole other road about how fear really changes the way you experience your reality. And so loving yourself enough to put boundaries around what you allow to penetrate into your consciousness really, really matters. I learned this lesson in a really tough way. I signed up for a 100-miler. This was in between the two that we talked about at the beginning, or the 100 and the 200. And I was reading Homo Deus. It's a book by Yuval Harari, and he's a professed atheist. I didn't realize at the time that a lot of why I was out there doing this was sort of, it gave me a spiritual outlet when I didn't have one, like a connection to nature, connection to something bigger than myself. And so I read this book, and it's not terribly optimistic. It's pretty, I don't know, for whatever reason, it just had an effect on me that like really zapped my hope. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was reading that. And then I went and I ran this 100-miler. And when I did, it was pouring and muddy. And like, the thing to understand about these races is that if you want to look for a reason to quit, you'll find one.
Yeah.
Full stop, right? If you want to find the reason, it's there. You're in a ton of pain. Like, your GI issues, like the mud, the water, it was freezing. My hands were numb, and I quit. It's like one of the only things I've ever quit in my entire life. It was like 3 a.m, and I was trudging up this muddy bank, and I was freezing and starving, and I couldn't keep food down. And I was just like feeling so sorry for myself. And I got back, and I was like, I'm done. I'm out of here. And I was like sitting with that feeling, and I started to peel the layers back and realize that like sort of my informational diet almost, I don't want to say it led me there, right? I made the decision, but it was the fabric. It was like the thing that I was feeding myself, the nutrition that I had. And so when I went to run this 200, because I became cognizant of this, I read a book. I bought a book to bring with me that was like more of a positive psychology type book. And I'm like, we're going to really play with this and experiment with it. Yeah. Then I forgot it. And my girlfriend had, You Are a Badass, that book. Yeah. And I was like, well, it's all we got, so I'm going to read it. And I took a line out of it and I put it in my pocket. And when I hit the low of lows in that 200-miler, when I was like coughing up blood and still had 120 miles to go, I read that line and I sat with it for like a good 20 minutes. And I was like, I came out of that moment realizing that this entire experience had really been orchestrated for me, that I was in a position now where I was getting to do the thing that I loved the most. And so, and then that would be the catalyst for a whole bunch of other things, right? And which is probably why I'm talking to you on this podcast in some small way. And so just realizing, man, the way that you feed yourself really matters when it comes to stuff like this.
Man, it's so incredible how that, you're saying that in a psychological capacity, right? Like what you're feeding your mind, but it's absolutely the same with food too, right? It's like if you're feeding yourself garbage, like it's no wonder that you feel like crap and you can't move well and you're inflamed all the time and you're, irritable bowel syndrome, constipated, or just, peeing out your butt all the, it's like all the bad things, right? Pretty incredible how that parallels so well. And obviously we don't have to get too far into that. What about the person that, they're just deathly afraid? And I know you talked about fear, and I know you talked about what you feed yourself, consciously, and what goes into your mind and all these things. But what about the person that's like, I'm too afraid to be vulnerable, or I don't want to be vulnerable? They've built up all these walls and all these obstacles to keep themselves from being vulnerable and bringing that darkness stuff into the light.
You're saying, what if you don't want to?
Yeah. What about that? Because that person is so prevalent. I've talked to that person, probably 9 times out of 10, or 9 out of the 10 people that I talk to, seems to be at least that person, right? Even we're just talking nutrition or fitness, let alone, stuff that you're dealing with that you're not going to share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on one level, I just want to say, well, this is the human experience. So at some point, you're going to have to want to move through your stuff more than you want to hang on to your things that are keeping you safe, mm-hmm. right? Like at some point, that's going to have to happen. Yeah. The other thing to understand, though, is that every moment that you're not facing it, it's growing and you're shrinking, right? Psychologically speaking, it's growing and you're getting smaller in relation to it. And so fear doesn't ever go away. Ever, right? I'm afraid of heights. I've jumped out of a helicopter over 100 times. I'm still afraid of heights. It's the deal. So what happens though, is instead of waiting for fear to get smaller, you incrementally increase courage in relation to fear so that it's not controlling you. You have a say in how you proceed, right? But that is incremental. And so I think realizing that then it's like, okay, so start with a journal, right? Mm. Start writing, flip open your phone, turn it to selfie mode, put the video on, and have a real honest conversation with yourself. You can delete it if you want. No one has to see it. But start bringing it into the light in some small way. And you can work toward these things, right? Not everybody's ready to just drop it.
Yeah.
Once you realize how good it feels, right? Yeah, right. Yeah. Accidentally post it. Once you realize how good it feels though, to give that darkness expression and put it into the light, you realize the only control it ever had over you was when it was in the darkness, right? It is liberation to start bringing it into the light. So some small way to do that, I would recommend.
Yeah. And so I know that you and I have worked together in a couple of different capacities with the Special Forces experience, and part of our offering, right, in that is like, okay, experiencing trauma, but then looking at that, difficulty or adversity or problematic thing, physiological, psychological, both, right? And then, how can we grow from it as opposed to have it create a stress disorder and disease and be problematic and now plague you for the rest of your life. But okay, let's work with it. And, but I know that you're working on something, as once this airs, right, people will still have an opportunity, unless it's totally full, but people will still have it sold out, to go down kind of a different route, right? Because the stuff with the SFE, this is like the person that wants to see where their limits are and find out if they're going to quit or not. And it is really, tries to be as close to a selection process or a special forces type experience as, but you've got a different sort of vantage point, a different approach, with what you're creating. What is that, and how might that help a different type of person maybe, or people, in a different way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what we're creating is something like a fishbowl experience, right? A lab of sorts where you can put yourself into adversity, put yourself into overwhelm, put yourself into these situations. And actually, because we have such an incredible team at the Special Forces, they call it the SFE collective, mm-hmm. of doctors and thinkers and just really incredible minds who really have made it their life's work to talk about the things that they're going to teach, the modules they're going to teach in this program. Mm-hmm. And so then the point of the art of adversity is cool. So we can put ourselves in these positions. We can get coached through it. So we're like in real time, really like wrestling with how to develop leadership and how to self-regulate and things like that. And because it's a bit of a fishbowl environment, it's gives us an opportunity to look at it from multiple different perspectives and be like, well, this is how you are showing up here. And, when you see yourself in an experience like that, it gives you another angle. It shows you something that you couldn't see when you're looking through your eyes. So it's sort of a combination of all of those things. And just really teaching this sort of stress inoculation, because we go through stress and then so often become victimized by that overwhelm for the rest of our lives. And our physiology, for example, continues to experience overwhelm. I like to tell a story of, like, I got out of the military, couldn't sleep at night. And I remember one night checking my heart rate and it's like 135 and like nothing's going on. I'm just laying in bed. Right. But my nervous system, I didn't have the ability to self-regulate my physiology. And so it was running away. It takes the psychology with it. And so teaching people these lessons prior to heading into stress will make them more resilient in the long term. And so that's the idea behind the art of adversity.
Yeah. And so you play that out. Does somebody have to just find it, click, register, and just show up? Or is there sort of a proving process on the front end? And then once they get in, then what happens, and how, so are you just giving them, breathing techniques and, I don't know, things to sort of tap in and create resiliency? Or is there other sort of unknowns that are involved in this, or guiding and coaching that is involved? Is there a book or certain books, or, yeah?
Yeah. So there'll be an application process first and foremost. Like, we want to get the right people on the bus and go to the right destination, right? So the application process just ensures that the right people are showing up there, because it's going to be there's an individual and a team component, because there's a leadership component to this. And so again, we just want to make sure that, and when we talk about the right people, it's the people that are willing, right? Yeah. It's the people that are actually willing to get into the arena, to fuck it up, to mess it up, to get dirty, to just go that route. Cool. And so there's an application, and then goes into a bit of a pipeline. So there'll be like an online person core part of the course. We're going to meet weekly for 6 weeks, and you'll have a new lecturer each week, and we're going to divide you into different levels of analysis, and you're going to learn about that level that week with a subject matter expert who's going to teach it. There'll be practices so that you can integrate it in your life. And then at the end of that 6 weeks, there'll be the 5-6 day in-person portion. And so that's when you're going to go, this is the Super Bowl, right? We're going to take all the things we've been doing, all the things we've learned. And it's not theory. These aren't just good ideas that we heard one time. These are, well, how does this apply to our lives? And so then we're going to have that in-person portion where you're actually going to be stress testing these ideas and have an opportunity to work through them in real time. And then at the end of that period is this another 6 week portion. And that's the integration phase. And this is the phase that I think in the personal development space, we're often missing. We go to these really cool experiences. People go to a Tony Robbins seminar for 3 days or whatever, and then they go back to their life on Monday with a little bit more motivation. And then by the following Monday, it's completely back to normal. And so how do we integrate what we've learned and create sustainable practices so that we can take that with us going forward? And maybe you're a professional that wants to share this with your team or something along those lines. So it gives you an opportunity to do that as well. Is
there like age limits around this? Is there physiological limits, like physical limits around this? Obviously the person has to be willing to do it, right? And willing to do the work and endure maybe some of the things and make scheduling choices and stuff to commit. But yeah, are there any other kind of limitations or boundaries around it?
Yeah. So in the application process, you'll see that there'll be litmus tests, for example, not that we're going to check, that you're going to want to be able to do because you're going to get there and have to do things similar to that. So that will be it. And you'll have plenty of time to train up to these things. So it's not like you have to be able to get off the couch and go do them, right? 10K rock or whatever. Yeah. At the same time, the process, you go out in the process, and like, if you quit, you quit. If you make it, you make it. Most don't, right? Yeah. This isn't that though. This is, I mean, you're going to make it if you want to. There's not even an option to quit in this. Yeah. But at the same time, you're going to learn a lot of the skills that are necessary to get through it. So we are getting through this together, right? And as a cadre, we're going to like truly give you inputs. We're going to hold the mirror up. You're in adversity. We hold up a mirror. You see how you're reacting. And then we ask you questions like, well, how could that have been different? How could you do it going forward? Right. And so you, as the client, right? If you decide to do this, you're wrestling with these ideas in real time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And then, so talk a little bit more about integrating it in. Is it like an email check-in, face-to-face, or how does that? Because I've done that. I've gone to this business summit or whatever, and then okay, I could have applied all these things, and I started to, but then I didn't follow through with my execution. Then I was back to square one. Then there's other times where I'm like, totally integrated it into my business, completely changed the way my business ran or whatever. And that's just a business example, let's say. But so how does that get played out or walked out?
Yeah. So integration, right? We could divide it into two categories. There's what's universally true for humans, right? Like there are psychological truths, for example, into how you can take something and integrate it. And so for that, we'll have, just like there were 6 weeks leading up where you're doing the weekly calls and check-ins, same thing going forward, accountability around what are those psychological principles? How am I showing up? Mm-hmm. At the same time, you'll also have one-on-one calls with a coach so that you can wrestle with some of this stuff in your own life as well.
Yeah.
Because the problem is it's so individualistic.
Yeah. I was going to say it's like your problem isn't necessarily my problem, isn't necessarily his problem, it's her problem.
Totally.
Yeah. That's awesome. So when is there dates for this? And then where would somebody sign up? Like if I wanted to make this happen, is there time? And then is there a place for me to find out more and register?
Yeah. So it kicks off, the in-person portion kicks off at the end of April 26, 2022. And so back that up 6 weeks, and that's when the actual online portion starts. And then what was the other part of that question?
Where would they go to register? To check those boxes.
So if you're interested in going through the application process, the specialforcesexperience.com is going to have a link to do that.
Awesome. Well, I mean, shoot, I feel like we just barely dropped into the surface. So clearly we'll have to have you on again. So the last question that we ask every single guest when we bring them on the Living Fit Show is, what is Living Fit to you? And the cool part is we get, these like uber like body worker, physiologists, doctors and whatnot. And then we get also, people like alpha hippies, Angelo, right, which is very into, wavelength and vibration and spiritual and all this. And so we just love this cornucopia of answers. And so it's not Living Fit, the brand. It's, Living Fit. So I'd be curious, especially from somebody who's been through so many physical endurance feats, as well as now psychological, what that answer would be.
Yeah, I think fit, it requires context, right? You become fit for something. And that's the thing that in my mind, we never actually ask ourselves. It's like, I just want to be fit. It's like, for what, right? Because I could get through 200-mile runs, but like I really, really hated myself, right? And so would I be considered fit and adaptable to my life at that point? I would say no, regardless of whether my engine can run for 4 days or not. And so I think you have to ask yourself, what does it mean? What do I want to be fit for? That really, really matters, right? Do you want to be fit for service? Do you want to be fit for showing up as like a healthy presence for your family? Like these things really matter. I also want to take the distinction away from physiology and psychology away, right? Because in my mind, if you think about sort of like Maslow's work or something like that, there's a physiological foundation that you live in. Like this is your vehicle for experiencing everything you're going to experience in this life. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people right now are like trying to troubleshoot psychological problems or taking pills for psychological problems that quite honestly are probably physiological problems, right? Mm-hmm. That could probably be solved by better sleep, food, and less stress and things along those lines. So to me, it's getting really, really clear about what your values are and how you want to show up in life, and realizing that whatever fit is to you, it's that, right? Making sure that you're fostering your life in a way, or cultivating your life in a way, so that you're fit for your value system, how you want to show up, what's important to you, your definition of success.
Man, that full stop, done. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Rick. I really appreciate you taking out the time to drop massive knowledge bombs on us, open up our minds, and then give us opportunity to drag stuff out of the darkness into the light, and even maybe do it through the art of adversity on the specialforceexperience.com.